Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, BC smuggles a sexy little Cyrus out of Velvet, but their destination is still unclear. The hard part now falls on Cyrus, but there's a catch. Cyrus still has no idea what the plan even is. What do BC and May have in mind for our favorite Valgardian? Well, you'll find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. I could tell that we were getting closer to the sea when the smell of salt began to fill the air more than usual, and the calls and the heckling got both louder and much dirtier. BC's tone rose in response, and soon she was engaged in a nearly constant string of banter and foul language as we bumped along the docks, with the sound of wind and mist and sea spray under it all. It was only a little while later, as the sounds of the waterfront began to fade, followed by the hollow sounds of beachside cliffs, that BC spoke to me again, slowing the horses down just a touch. "All right, there's a second set of clothes in that other bag, a full Cestran swim skin and equipment," she said. "Strip down, change into them quickly. The path here isn't busy, but we don't have all day. Go." I reached into the bag and found a set of thin, warm, breathable, full-foot tights and an undershirt with a hood. And then there was a second layer of the same, that were woven with a strange, flexible, and sticky material that shimmered even in the low light of the carriage. There was, unfortunately, no way my undershorts would fit beneath the Cestran outfit, so after a brief burst of embarrassment, I weakly mentioned that I was changing and quickly disrobed. "What was that?" BC said as she whipped her head back, saw me fumbling, and snorted before returning her eyes to the road. She definitely mentioned something about Valgardia not having much sun, but I was too caught up in getting the clothes on as quickly as possible to have any sort of response. The first underlayer went on first, but the second was stretchy, clingy, and a little harder to fight through. Still, though, after another round of impatient heckling from BC, I was suited up, with my velvet outfit packed into the bag. BC took them to dispose of later, and then directed me towards the pair of fin-toed boots at the bottom of the bag, as well as the set of domed glasses on a string made from the same material as the rest of the outfit. "Okay, I'm sure May asked you this, but just to be sure, you can swim, can't you?" BC asked when I had donned the boots. The dome glasses made more sense now. Shit, don't tell me you can't swim, kid. No, I can swim. I'm no champ, but I've done it a few times before. Well, good. That would have been a really important detail to miss. You will need to swim. Okay, where am I going to be swimming? I asked. Outside, the echo of the waves against the oceanside cliffs had gotten louder. "We're coming up on a spot about a few hundred yards from us, where two spits of rock and the waves shelter you pretty well from anyone looking out from Puntera or the docks. What you're gonna do is you're gonna dive in there and swim straight out to sea as quietly and quickly as you can. When you're far enough out, you'll be picked up by an ally of ours. He'll do his best to help you with your gift today." My spirits lifted a little bit, but just a little bit. I wasn't at all looking forward to swimming out in the ocean, but learning more about some of my abilities was a big deal. BC continued. "Yeah, so he'll drop you off this evening at the docks with someone from Flair," she said. "At which point you're just a stray that Mernst and his wife found who wants to be a bartender. That's really all the hiding we'll have to do. No one will bat an eye about another stray finding their way to Flair, and heck, with your hair, you already fit in with the guys there." Okay, and I'll pretend I never met you or May, right? That was what you guys said last night?" "You're a quick listener. Good. I'll make an excuse to head over to Flair this evening, drop off the remainder of your stuff," BC said. "I'll reintroduce myself then, so please don't act like you know me. Anyway, we're almost there. Don't flail too hard when you're out there, and swim straight out to sea. No one is looking for you except for Mjernst, and we'd like to keep it that way." "Well, no one's looking for you except for Edera, the fire of the world's ending, and I don't know, who knows else." BC was talking again, so I ignored C. "Oh, well, all right then, my little swim champ," BC said. "Time for you to open the curtain." Beyond us, the dark blue ocean stretched out beneath gray clouds in the early morning light as far as I could see, vanishing against the dark curve of the horizon. Ahead of the carriage, along the rocky but well-worn path that hugged the cliffside, there was a bright column of light where the rocks that lined the edges of the beach opened up further, erupting in spray where the waves met the land. Mike May said, "It's a shame it has to be this way," BC said. "Things didn't used to have to be like this, but since Well, here's hoping we deal with these bumfuck Eterans and you get to see this place at its best, rather than its worst. You might even stop acting like such a wimpy cherry boy." C was in the middle of explaining to me what that insult meant when BC cracked the reins for the horses to stop. "You see the gap?" BC asked as she hopped out onto the road. We had stopped right where the water ran up to the stone, a deep path where water cut right through the rocky shoals all around us. To the left and the right, there were submerged rocks and earth, but here there was only deep blue water. I reached out with my mind, trying to get a sense for it like I had done in the forest, but there was only the churning, unfathomable power of the ocean as the waves steadily rose and crashed against the rocks beneath us. "Okay, so go under the breakers, not over," BC said as she walked to the side and opened up the carriage, checking over me and then cuffing me on the side of the head. "What, were you going to try to put these glasses on in the water?" she asked. She grabbed the water glasses and spun me around with ease, quickly tying them tight against my face with a skillful round of quick knots. I'm sorry, I didn't." "No complaining, no time to be a pussy," she said. "Take a running jump out into that gap and get out there before someone comes. Go!" Right now?" I asked. "Do you need me to throw you?" I looked from her to the water and then back to her. Then I looked back to the ocean and then back to her again. I was losing my nerve. "All right then," she said, and grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and steered me to the edge of the water. Then, with her other hand, she grabbed me by the meeting of my shirt and my pants. "Trust me, you'll thank me for this later. Breathe deep, swim well, good luck, and do your absolute best not to die." And then with far more strength than ever should have been able to pack into that frame, she stepped forward and literally tossed me out into the water. The impact of the waves and the shocking cold of the wintry waters was enough of a shock to make me forget that I'd just been thrown about a half dozen yards. And that shock was only replaced by the shock of a dull, throbbing cold. The rubbery outer layer felt weird as it sucked close to me in my skin, but it seemed to repel and cut through the water. It was warmer than I expected, and with the thrash of my feet, I pulsed slowly towards the surface, bursting up into the air. I had gotten all turned around, and looking back on the other side, I just barely managed to wave at BC before another cresting swell slapped me with freezing water. And then she mounted the carriage again and started heading out of sight. The current was steadily starting to sweep me back to shore, and with little else to do, I started to swim out towards the ocean, fighting as best as I could to stay in the little column between the rocks and the shoals as I headed out to sea. I could sense things swimming all around me, the occasional flash of silver and blue and red and even gold as streamlined fishes and aquaguanas and scuttlers and dozens of other things with no fins, many fins, a couple fins, and all manners of eyes and appendages wove through the complicated maze of deep rock canyons to either side of me. In another dozen yards, the hard rock of the ocean floor gave way to deep, smooth-tumbled, sloping sand that dropped away from me the further from shore I swam. Before long, I could sense the rocks on either side dropping ever deeper into the water, eventually falling beneath the surface as the shore dropped out from beneath me. The churning, frothy surf was replaced with steady swelling waves twice as high and now seemingly twice as cold. Though the Cestrin clothes helped, the creeping chill of the temperature began to set in, and that wasn't the only thing that started to send shivers down my spine. Beneath me, I could sense larger and larger shapes as they moved. First, it was just a flicker that might well have been the swaying of moss or the algae or the kelp, but then there were more, flickering silver and mottled green going against the current, cutting through the water far beneath me and then disappearing. Doing all that I could to stick to BC's advice, I kept my strokes steady and as quiet as possible, with senses laser fixated beneath me and terror building with every stroke. I had to trust her. But my instincts were screaming not to turn around. I kept on like that until just up ahead of me on the edge of my perception, it was like the seafloor had been cleaved away. Reaching my perception over the edge, which seemed to go down forever for all that I could tell, all my mind bounced up against was more open water and the infinite darkness of the abyss. And somewhere out in the infinite darkness, pushing against the edge of my perception, was a hunger, deeper and more all-encompassing than even the deepest layers of the expanse. It was very clear to me that I needed to be out of the water immediately. But as I tried to turn, a wave crested around me, hurling me up through the air, slapping me down in the water so hard my water glasses flicked over my face, and I lost track of which way was up. I gasped at the impact and swallowed water, and coughed, and swallowed more water as I tried to inhale after the cough, and it was only through sheer luck that I burst through the surface again, tumbling and swaying in the swell as I tried to keep my head above the water. And then from far beyond the wall, a cutting wave of oceanic power surged across the surface, heading straight towards me. BC's instructions evaporated in my brain, and I turned and swam as fast as I could, slapping against the water with all I had as I tried to get as fast as I could away from that force. It was cruising along the waves, making a beeline for me like it could sense my presence, and yet whatever its true form was still hidden behind the surging swells of the open waves. The idea that the shadow skating across the water might have been Murnst, the guy who I was looking for, didn't even cross my mind. Not even once it was nearly upon me, and I should have noticed voices shouting out at me to climb aboard. And when the massive pole hook scooped around my midsection to drag me towards the vessel still fully underway, I was still fighting and kicking and screaming, all the way up until a pair of strong arms dragged me pretty much straight up out of the water onto the deck of a surging wave rider. I banged pretty much every joint I had on the smooth wooden deck of the vessel, flopping into the boat, which hooked a sharp turn away from the shore, shot the barrel of a massive wave and emerged on the other side, and then began to skillfully weave across the turbulent waters, propelled by the humming force of the ocean, which seemed to surround the entire craft. Someone was driving this thing with a gift, and they were strong. Still catching my breath, I turned to the person who'd picked me up out of the ocean. It was a much older man with slightly wind-worn, caramel-colored skin that wrinkled around his light orange eyes. He had a full head of rich white hair, and he was wearing similar clothes as me, though when he called out to the captain, it was in a language very different from Sestran. I looked around me. The watercraft was sleek and sturdy, shaped like a pointy-nosed teardrop that was probably a little more than 20 feet long. It was lined with crystal-clear windows along each side and had a totally clear front nose, where the looming, ponytailed back of a dark-skinned Sestran woman stood, doing graceful, powerful forms while wreathed in a blue glow. Past her, I could see the enormous waves as they crested in front of us, and yet when our captain slid through her forms, the vessel answered, like they were one. In that way, the captain carried us, weaving through gaps between cresting waves, veering along still more troughs and barrels of the crashing ocean, and even directly surging underwater through the heart of the biggest swells and out the other side, all while humming and singing with a blue energy. She was who was driving this thing, and wow, she was cool. I'd been dragged up on the back of the Wave Rider, which was open to the air and stocked with lines and traps and fishing equipment that was all neatly folded and stored. And any water off of me or sea spray that made it into the boat quickly left through a bilge hole on the bottom of the vessel. Next to me, there were 2 platforms carved out of the material that made up the back of the cruiser, and they seemed ripe for sitting on, so I pulled myself up and settled in, grasping firmly onto one of the many handles that lined the boat. My next step was to curl up and try to get back any of the heat that had left my body in the cold water. The caramel-skinned man had been digging in one of the small compartments next to me and gave a warm smile as he offered me a blanket made of similar material as my clothes. I wrapped up in the blanket, which certainly helped, and held on tight as the man continued to dig in the cabinets. The fact he was not falling every time the Wave Runner turned and tumbled was nothing short of amazing to me, but he seemed very, very experienced on this kind of craft. Finally, he pulled out a big cylinder, cracked it open, and poured out a steaming liquid into a thick mug, which he handed to me. "For you, young'un," he said, in heavily accented Uveran. "It'll warm your bones and get your strength back up." I gratefully took the steaming drink, which was a thick, sweet spiced tea of some sort, and I nursed it as we raced away from shore. First the oceanside cliffs, then the old city and Puntera, and then the entire bay of Nazarene came into view out the back of the Wave Rider as we streaked out across the ocean, and then turned with a steady arc to the south, hugging the coast and heading away from Nazarene. In another minute or so, the swells began to calm, and then after a brief conversation with our captain, the caramel-skinned man searched below deck again, this time retrieving an enormous furled sail with a single collapsible mast. He ran it along a wire that ran along the spine of the Wave Rider. Then he called out to the captain, who hurled a lever forward. Beneath us there was a steady chunk as something flared out beneath the boat. The caramel-skinned man reached down and began to haul one of the lines, sending the folded mast and sail running along the spine of the vessel, clicking it into place when it reached the back of the Wave Rider. It stretched out about a dozen feet from the back of the vessel. With a few pulls to another line, that collapsible mast and its ridged sail ran back along the top of the Wave Rider, for it clicked into place, front and center on the top of the vessel. With a few more tweaks and a few more lines, the sail rose up the mast and caught the wind, and the boat began to hum as we picked up speed. Striding to the back, the captain reached back into the water and yanked up yet another lever, then took over the lines. With a comfortable glance out towards the horizon, he nodded in satisfaction. "Well, I believe I owe you an introduction, my boy," the caramel-skinned man finally said. He'd finished pouring our captain some tea, and now poured some for himself. "My name is Mjernst," he said. "I'm a windwaker from the mountains of Kesh far to the south, and this is my thunder-carved jewel of the sea and the greatest Wave Runner you'll ever meet, my lovely wife, Wayla." She rolled her eyes at the little comment. "We've got a little while before we reach our destination," Mernst said, "so feel free to rest and listen and enjoy our journey. Have you ever been this far along the coast?" I shook my head, and he got a gleam in his eyes. "Ah, then you are in for a treat, my boy." Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.